All right, and we're back with Chapter 12 of Red Dog by Bill Wallace, read with permission of Simon and Schuster. The last time we listened, Adam, after the prospectors who had invaded his home, threatened his mother and sister, um, spilled the beans, and told them what they wanted to know. He told them that Sam was gone and that he was on his way back from Cheyenne with the deed to their property. So we'll see how Adam deals with the consequences of that a little bit today. Chapter 12. It had been dark for a long time before the oil in the lantern began to burn low. The men still sat talking at the table. The room was cloudy with the foul smell of their cigarette smoke. Adam lay at the edge of the loft. There was a place where he could look down on the table without being seen. He tried to listen to what they were saying, but he could only catch bits and pieces of their conversation. Finally, he pressed his ear against the floorboards of the loft and strained to hear their hushed voices. "I think we ought to go ahead and get it over with," one said. Pete rubbed his tight-set eyes. "Did you ever hear of insurance, Jack?" "Sure, Pete, but I don't see no sense in keeping them around. They might yell out, warn him or something." Pete shook his head. "This man may be smarter than we give him credit for. What if he comes to the cabin and sees something amiss?" The big man nodded. "Yeah, if something spooks him 'fore we ambush him, he'll scat out like a scared rabbit. The deed'll go along with him." "Not only the deed," said Pete, "but if he gets away and finds we have murdered his wife and family, he would be like a ghost to us. He'd haunt us wherever we go. We'd never get a decent night's sleep, knowing he was out in the darkness, watching us, just waiting to even the score." He cleared his throat. "No, gentlemen, my idea is to keep the woman and the 2 children alive and well until the deed is in our hands." "Then we let 'em go?" Jack seemed puzzled. Squinty Eyes laughed. "And have them report to the authorities how we stole their property? No, gentlemen, as soon as we have the deed, you can do what you want with them. If the man notices something wrong before we can get a clear shot at him, we will simply trade his family for him. Once we've disposed of him, it should be no problem to find and finish off the others." He ground his cigarette out on the floor. "Now, gentlemen, our lantern is about out of oil. I suggest we get some rest so our aim will be good in the morning. Jack, you take the first watch." Adam could hear movement after the lantern went out. He heard the men finding their way to the bed and the clunking sound as they took their boots off. After a while, his eyes adjusted to the darkness. He could see the one named Jack sitting by the window with his rifle. Laurie had dozed off in Mother's arms. Adam could tell that his mother was still awake, but the day had been long and hard for her. Her head nodded and dipped. She tried to fight off sleep, but at last it took her, and she rested quietly. It wasn't long before the rattling, growling sound of snoring came from below the loft. Adam could hear the different tones of the 2 men snoring. The man they left standing watch must have heard it too. The snoring was a harsh, ugly sound. But to someone who was tired and whose eyes were heavy, it must have been like the music of sleep. Before too long, the man's head started to droop. Finally, it fell to rest on the windowsill. Adam rolled back over on his back and laced his fingers behind his head. The bed was soft. It had been a long day, and he was as tired as he could ever remember. Yet Adam knew sleep wouldn't come. The thought of what he'd done gnawed at his mind like a beaver gnawing at an aspen. He'd lied to himself this afternoon. He'd tricked himself into believing that all those men wanted was the deed, and that after they had it, they'd leave without hurting anyone. Now he knew the truth. They were going to kill Sam, and when they'd done that, they'd kill Laurie and Mother and him. He shuddered. feeling as cold on the inside as he did on the outside. Adam was afraid to close his eyes. The musty, rancid stench of hand-rolled cigarette smoke filled his nose. Above him, the hard rain that fell had loosened one of the sod blocks that made their roof. Around the edges, he could see the night sky. It was a clear night. Through the crack, he could see the stars twinkling bright above his head. And when he looked up at the stars that shone through that loose chunk of sod roof, a strange smile came to his lips.